1993. It's hard to believe it's been a whole 10 years since... What do you mean it's been 3 decades? Outrageous. Indeed, it might have been a little while since the year 1993, but that doesn't mean that we've forgotten all of the great video games that this particular 12-month period had to offer. And we're back yet again to tell you all about the very best. If you've seen any of the best of videos before, then it's likely you'll know the drill. But for any newcomers, here are the rules. A game is eligible for one of these lists if it was released in the year in question, this case 1993, in at least one territory, and received a minimum of 7 professional reviews. We exclude ports, re-releases and collections from these rankings unless they're significantly different from the original. But don't worry, we'll cover them in the list pertaining to their initial release. Got all of that? Good. I'm Ashton from TripleJump, and here are the 10 best games of 1993. Number 10, Simon the Sorcerer, PC, 86.25%. We're kicking off today's list with a bit of point-and-click fun, courtesy of developer and publisher AdventureSoft, who are perhaps most famous for, well, this actually. Released in September 1993, Simon the Sorcerer, somewhat unsurprisingly, tells the story of Simon. No, not that one. A 12-year-old boy who, after receiving a dog for his birthday, ends up summoning a portal to another world. There are several more steps between the two occurrences which are indeed related, but I don't want to be here all day talking about the plot. The game was largely inspired by Terry Pratchett's Discworld series of novels, whilst also parodying the likes of The Lord of the Rings, The Chronicles of Narnia, and several popular fairy tales. Although some outlets were a little disappointed with Simon the Sorcerer's controls and the linear nature of the gameplay, these issues weren't enough to spoil the title, and it received heaps of praise for its sumptuous backgrounds, Dean Evans of CU Amiga's words, not mine, wacky tongue-in-cheek humour, and engaging puzzles. I can honestly say I've never heard a video game described as sumptuous before. I suppose there's a first time for everything. Number 9, Doom, PC, 86.67%. We're a little shocked that the original Doom, which is considered by most to be one of the forefathers of the modern FPS, didn't get a higher review score. Sure, 86.67 is not to be sniffed at, but we'd always assumed the game would average somewhere in the 90s. Clearly, critics in 1993 were super harsh. Doom exploded onto the scene around 18 months after id Software's previous FPS triumph, Wolfenstein 3D, and blew players away with its fast-paced demon-slaying action. Inspired by Dungeons & Dragons, Evil Dead 2 and Aliens, Doom puts players in control of Doom Guy, a space marine stationed on Mars who must fight his way through hordes of invading demons from hell. The graphics, high-octane gameplay and level design were all praised by critics, and looking at the game retrospectively, many video game journalists agree that Doom really pushed the envelope when it came to video game immersion. Some critics did complain that the gameplay was somewhat repetitive, and in fairness, they're not wrong, but if you're after a bit of heart-racing, mindless shooter fun, then even these days you can do far worse than pick up a copy of Doom. Number 8, Secret of Mana, SNES, 87.28%. We're turning our attention now to the classic RPG developed by Square Enix, or simply Square as they were at the time. Secret of Mana was a follow-up to 1991's Seiken Densetsu, or Final Fantasy Adventure Mystic Quest, or Seiken Densetsu Final Fantasy Gaiden if you want to get multiple alternative titles about this, and was released across North America and Japan in 1993 before making its way to the PAL region the following year. The game follows the exploits of 3 young boys who, after pulling a rusty sword from a stone and accidentally unleashing a whole bunch of monsters, we've all been there, set out on a quest to re-energise the sword and ultimately stave off the threat of an empire that seeks to conquer the world. Unlike other role-playing games of the time, battles were real-time rather than turn-based, incorporating a ring command mechanic which paused the actions and allowed players to make decisions mid-battle. Critics had bucket loads of praise for Secret of Mana, commending its graphics, combat system and overall quality of the gameplay. I'm not sure what the secret of Mana is, but the devs certainly knew the secret to making a good RPG. Number 7, Gunstar Heroes, Mega Drive, 87.6%. Hope you've bought some nice comfy trainers with you, because we're about to get our run and gun on. Don't worry, I've bought some plasters in case anyone gets a blister. Gunstar Heroes focuses on the titular Gunstars, a duo who, throughout the game, use their acrobatic prowess and experience with firearms in order to prevent an evil empire from getting their hands on a bunch of powerful gems. Yikes! There surely were a lot of nefarious empires floating around in the early 90s, weren't there? Gameplay-wise, Gunstar Heroes tasked players with shooting their way through a whole bunch of enemies across 7 different stages. Though while some stuck with the traditional run-and-gun formula, others plonked the character into a minecart-like vehicle, a spaceship, and even a board game. The game went down incredibly well with critics, who were impressed by Gunstar Heroes' fast-paced action and the wide variety in the level design. The game was wonderfully chaotic from beginning to end, which was what made it so exciting, and is no doubt part of the reason why it was awarded Game Fan's Game of the Year accolade, and why it's been ported to more consoles than you can shake a stick at. Number 6, Star Fox, SNES, 88%. Sadly, spoiler alert, there's no Mario on our list today. But that doesn't mean we're not getting a visit from our pal Shigeru Miyamoto, who made his mark on the year 1993 with brand new IP Star Fox. Although Star Fox might not be Nintendo's most popular franchise of all time, it's still got a whole army of fans around the world. And as recently as 2017, players have gotten to enjoy new entries into the series. The original Star Fox landed on the SNES between February and June 1993, depending on where in the world you lived, and put players into the somewhat furry shoes of Volpine protagonist Fox McCloud, as he and the rest of the Star Fox team attempted to defend their homeworld Corneria from the invading forces of Big Bad Andross. The rail shooter plonked Fox, and by extension the player, into a spacecraft, and in each level, it was up to them to shoot down enemies and defeat a boss. By the end of March 1993, Star Fox had sold over 1.7 million copies across Japan and North America, making it, up until that point at least, the fastest selling video game launch in North America. There really is little wonder. The gameplay was highly addictive, the central characters were both adorable and badass in equal measure, and the 3D graphics were groundbreaking. Not a bad effort for a Fox in overalls. Number 5, Disney's Aladdin, Mega Drive, 88.33%. These days, movie tie-in titles can be counted upon to be pretty naff, but if you look back far enough into the annals of video game history, you'll find one or two gems. Case in point, Disney's Aladdin, a platformer developed by Virgin Games USA for the Mega Drive, not to be confused with Disney's Aladdin, a platformer developed by Capcom for the SNES. Everybody clear? Good, we'll crack on then. Based on the 1992 animated classic of the same name, Disney's Aladdin followed the plot of the film and tasked players with side-scrolling their way through a bunch of Agrabah-themed levels, collecting apples, golden icons, gems, and much, much more as they went. Not only was Disney's Aladdin a commercial success, selling over 4 million copies worldwide, making it the 3rd best-selling Mega Drive game of all time, but it also received a great deal of praise for its gameplay, and even won awards for its animation, which was created for the first time in video game history by hand-drawing each frame. You might say that this particular movie tie-in game was one jump ahead of the competition. You know, like the song. Okay, I'll see myself out. Number 4, Luna, the Silver Star, Sega CD, 88.4%. Clearly, the secret to being a successful game in 1993 was simply sticking the word star somewhere in the title, because that's 3 we've had now. Although it was originally released in Japan in mid-1992, Luna, the Silver Star, didn't make its way to North America until December of the following year, which means that it gets to enjoy a spot on today's list. According to its creators, the game was designed to be a different kind of RPG, by making use of the at the time up-and-coming CD-ROM technology. Unlike many of its peers, Luna the Silver Star featured high-quality audio, full-motion video and voice acting, which for a game of the time was quite novel. The game centres on Alex, a young boy with dreams of becoming a great hero. Upon discovering an ancient dragon, Alex and his friends find themselves on a journey across the world to gather the power to become the next Dragon Master, all in the hopes that they might save the world. Critics lauded the title, praising its graphics, music and story, and despite some complaints being levelled at its combat system, which a few found dull, it was still considered to be one of the finest RPGs of the year. Number 3, The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening, Game Boy, 89.82%. Hey look everyone, it's Shigeru Miyamoto and friends, back with another smashing 1993 title. I don't know where they find the time. The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening, originally started out as a project that aimed to port A Link to the Past from the SNES to the Game Boy, but it eventually grew in scope and a new game was born. The fourth instalment into the Legend of Zelda franchise was the first that had ever been released for a handheld system. And unlike its predecessors, it didn't take place in Hyrule and featured neither the Triforce nor Princess Zelda herself. Instead, Link's Awakening saw the eponymous protagonist stranded on an island and tasked players with exploring, fighting monsters and solving puzzles in order to collect musical instruments that would awaken the Windfish and allow Link to escape. Link's Awakening received critical acclaim, with some even going as far as to call it the best Game Boy game ever. And it's really not surprising. The story was engrossing and the gameplay was hugely engaging. There were some complaints levelled at the monochrome graphics, though the blame there lies largely at the Game Boy's door, and at the controls, but all in all, Link's Awakening was a solid adventure for anyone looking to get their Zelda fix on the go. Number 2, Gabriel Knight, Sins of the Fathers, PC, 92.8%. This isn't the first time that we've seen novelist Gabriel Knight on one of these lists, as the follow-up to this particular title was featured in the Best of 1995 video, though that game, The Beast Within: A Gabriel Knight Mystery, only made it to number 6. And whilst it was great, it wasn't quite as good as its predecessor, Gabriel Knight: Sins of the Fathers. As you can probably guess, the game focuses its attention on the titular Gabriel, a struggling writer who begins investigating a series of murders in New Orleans in order to gain material for his new book. Whilst on the trail of the killer, however, he finds that he's a descendant of a German family who were involved with hunting down supernatural forces. And you thought your relatives were weird. Gabriel Knight: Sins of the Fathers did not do very well commercially, but it was a hit with the critics, mostly because of the fact that it was genuinely scary. The tense atmosphere had been masterfully created and blended with a story that kept audiences hooked from beginning to end. It seems like the only sin here was the fact that hardly anybody played the damn thing. And number 1, Maniac Mansion 2, Day of the Tentacle, PC, 95%. You know, big franchises are all well and good, but we must admit that it is nice to see a game that isn't Mario, Metroid or The Legend of Zelda in the number 1 spot for once. Developed and published by LucasArts, and directed, produced and designed by Tim Schafer and Dave Grossman of the Secret of Monkey Island fame, Maniac Mansion 2: Day of the Tentacle was the sequel to the 1987 graphic adventure Maniac Mansion. Players took control of Bernard Bernoulli and his two friends Hoagie and Laverne, and were tasked with solving puzzles and using time travel to explore different periods throughout history in order to stop the evil purple tentacle from taking over the world. Yes, the premise was bonkers, but somehow it worked. Critics barely had a bad word to say about Day of the Tentacle, lauding everything from its humour and voice acting to its interface and design. It was an improvement over its predecessor in every way, and this is reflected in its average review score. Sadly, Day of the Tentacle didn't fare particularly well commercially, but all is not lost, because the remastered version is available on Steam. So now might be a good time to go and show this underappreciated classic the love that it deserves.